What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to America's Finest Sports. It's Wednesday night, which means we are talking basketball. I'm actually joined by Carlos here. He doesn't have his camera on, which is totally fine. Carlos, how are you doing? Do you want to introduce yourself for the people that don't know your voice?
Yeah, man. My name is Carlos Diaz. I'm a really big Phoenix Suns fan, even though we're not really viewed as one of the nicest teams, I guess. But yeah, I just hopped on and want to talk some basketball, and I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so obviously Carlos is a big Phoenix Suns fan, so we're going to start off when we're going to be talking about the Phoenix Suns. Some later topics that we'll get into is we'll talk about some young stars and the potential and prospects of building around them. And then finally, we're going to be talking about, we did this for the NFL, or at least we attempted to do it. I think we ran out of time and didn't get to actually do it during the live stream. But a will it work and talk about, will it work this season and what teams are trying to do. And we're going to be talking about the Sixers and Portland Trailblazers with that. But, getting into it, the Phoenix Suns, the biggest thing right now is that I'm looking at with the Phoenix Suns is the timeline because, you have an aging Chris Paul, you have a superstar in Devin Booker. You have Mikal Bridges, locked up till 2025, 2026 season. DeAndre Ayton, you've got locked up till the 2025 2026 season, presumably. And then, but like with Chris Paul, it's kind of the big question mark. Carlos, when you're looking at this team, is the window of winning a championship, where is that? Could it be within the next 5 years, or does it have to kind of be with this Chris Paul and like what does the future of this team kind of look like for you?
So I definitely think that with Mikal Bridges, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, and even Cam Johnson, that's actually a really solid young core in itself. And just like you said, most of them are locked up, other than Cam Johnson, who's waiting his rookie extension. But overall, one of my biggest fear factors, and honestly, if I'm being realistic with myself, I think the timeline is kind of based off of Chris Paul. I believe he's 38 years old. Um, so he has maybe one, two maximum good seasons left in him. And for him to do that at 38, I mean, is already incredible in itself. He's showed he's can prolong his career. But overall, unless we can get a good replacement for Chris Paul by the time he leaves, yeah, the championship window that pretty much lies within Chris Paul himself. Now, as far as the window to continue to make playoffs, I think that that group will do just fine. I just don't know if they're championship ready. They haven't shown me that they can take that next step. Mikal Bridges isn't an ISO player. DeAndre Ayton is still trying to figure out his own game, even though he's improved immensely, in my opinion. Cam Johnson, more of a 3-and-D type player. As far as Devin Booker, who's by far my favorite player, um, I think there's a lot of doubt casted on him because of Chris Paul. A lot of people think that Chris Paul is the only reason that the Suns have made it this far. And he does have a big factor, but I think Book has just as big enough a factor. I just don't know if he'll be able to do it as the only ISO scorer on this team.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because right now, like when you look at all their players, they have, I mean, you can say campaign, but they have two ISO scores right now, and it's Chris Paul and Devin Booker, and they're two of the best in the NBA. But Chris Paul, he's going to be 38 this year, and the problem with Chris Paul, I think, is very different than LeBron James. When he gets to that level, because it's like LeBron's been pretty healthy, right? Some guys you kind of expect to stay healthy. Chris Paul has had the injury bug, and it's typically not been, season ending or stuff like that, but it's just been out 1 to 2 weeks, out 2 weeks, out a week, out 3 games. And sometimes that's happened to the playoffs, and that's not been, I'm not trying to say this is just him on the Suns. That's been him his entire career. And you can't help injuries, but it's something where, like, okay, as he's getting older, those are just going to keep increasing. And as an OKC Thunder fan myself, I got to watch Chris Paul, and the dude is a leader, and that's something that you can't take away from him. So even if he is injured and stuff like that, I think he can still help the team. It's just something where like you're paying him right now. What is it? $30 million, $28 million. It looks like if he's not playing, you don't have another ISO score, and I get that, you can have the great ball movement that Phoenix really seems to have. They are the way that they play basketball, it looks beautiful. They are a fun team to watch, and that's one of the reasons why they made the NBA Finals. I think it wasn't just ISO scoring; it was everybody on this team is passing, moving, picking, and hitting their open shots. Without Chris Paul, though, how does this offense function without Chris Paul? Because we don't know the future of the point guard position. The bench is, like, looking at it, players that they have more than 2 years right now. They have Cam Payne, they have Landry Shamet, Bridges, Chris Paul, Ayton, and Booker. How is this offense going to look?
So, I mean, to be honest, you kind of saw the biggest weakness within the Suns in the Dallas Mavericks series. You know, who knows if it's true or not? Some people casted doubt, but it was reported that Chris Paul was again injured in that series. And there was one significant play where it blew my mind as a fan. Chris Paul had like it was game 3, I believe, at Dallas. Chris Paul had a wide open layup, and instead of taking it, for some reason, he dumped it off to Ayton, who didn't expect it. And I don't even think we got the points off of that possession. But knowing that, and it seemed as if the main focus was to put the pressure on Devin Booker and trust that no one else on the Suns is going to be able to create their own shot. And that's where the double teams came in, and especially in game 7. And I mean, as you saw, no one was up to the task. So as far as how the offense will look, it's hard to say. It's hard to say because there have been times where even with Cam Payne at the point guard position, they've looked solid because Coach Monty Williams has that 0.5 system where you have to make a decision within 0.5 seconds, whether to shoot, drive, or pass. You have 0.5. And it's worked really well. It's a good system. But again, the system fails as soon as you give the ball to someone who can't create their own shot. And with Devin Booker being the only person to do that without Chris Paul, it's just really tough for you to go anywhere, no matter how much depth you have or anything else like that. So I think the offense, it's tough to say unless we know like who the true replacement is, because I definitely do not see Cameron Payne as the future point guard of the Suns. I don't think it's realistic. I don't think James Jones has that within his plans. But I definitely think that whoever the replacement may be needs to be a pass first type point guard at the very least. I loved Ricky Rubio during his time here before he got traded to Oklahoma. He was a great fit for Devin Booker and even the rest of the team. So I think as long as we get a traditional pass first type point guard, I think it can continue as long as we fill it with some, second unit shot creators by themselves at the very least.
Yeah, and right now it seems like the only way that they're going to be able to get that is it has to be through free agency or trade, because they don't have any other teams' picks, and the way that they're set up, they should not be getting any high lottery picks by any means. They should be in the playoffs trying to contend. And so, and this whole free agency class was very underwhelming compared to recent years. But like, even looking at next, like, if as a Suns fan, Chris Paul, let's say he plays this year, the Phoenix Suns do solid, but it's just something where you can tell there's a decline. Do you try and figure out a way to move on from him and go after one of these, other free agents that are coming up next year? I'll pull up the, positions so that I can get them all right. But like right now, the top point guard that's going to be available next year, it's Westbrook and Kyrie Irving, which I don't think they fit very well. But like D'Angelo Russell, Derrick Rose, Patrick Beverly, Those are kind of the, Reggie Jackson. Those are kind of the options that it looks like may be available. Like if Chris Paul is declining, what do they do at the end of this year or even the end of next year to try and save it? Because when you have Devin Booker, in this age, you have to be going for that championship, right? You can't try and tank, and do what so many other teams have tried to do when they have these stars. They waste their youth and their prime. What do you do with Chris Paul if he's not getting them there, or he gets injured again, or something happens to him?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not like you just go full rebuild mode, just because Chris Paul doesn't work out. So definitely no scenario would happen like that because you still have a great young core. Um, as far as what you would do, one of my favorite things about the Suns, if you look at the current roster, if you look at the contracts based off the players, they are actually very tradable contracts. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk about this Kevin Durant mess, but that's just like a recent example. But if the Suns really wanted to have a contingency plan, they have the right contract amounts within their players to go ahead and make a trade if they need to, because they do own all of their picks for the next few seasons. So if they honestly, the only scenario that I can see them improving is by doing a big trade, no matter who it is. Because in free agency, you're not going to have the cap space. You kind of seal that off just in itself by Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, and Mikal Bridges. And you still have the rest of the roster to fill. So I don't think free agency is going to be an option for the Suns for the next few seasons. It's going to have to be through trade. And luckily, again, they still own all their draft picks. And there's contracts such as Jay Crowder. He's on an expiring deal. He's in an expiring deal this year. I think he's making about $9 million. Dario Saric, who's also making about $9 million, I believe. Yeah. Torrey Craig, $5 million. And these contracts, they add up over time, and that's kind of something that teams look for. They more look for expiring contracts so that they can just move on and get ready for free agency themselves. So yeah, any plan, it has to go through the trade market.
Yeah, I mean, the benefit is the expiring contracts, and a lot of those are expiring this year. If the Phoenix Suns are playing this year and it's not going the way that maybe you would hope, trade deadline, is there any potential for a Chris Paul trade at the trade deadline this year if just, maybe an injury has been nagging him or he just isn't the same guy? Or do you have to stick it out with him this year? Because, if you want to get a superstar player to pair with Devin Booker, Chris Paul probably would have to be on the way out, just because of getting the money to work. But is there any possibility of a Chris Paul trade this year? I don't think it's likely by any means, but what do you think about potentially moving on from him mid-season if the season's not going to the level that you're hoping for?
Yeah, I don't think that a Chris Paul trade would happen. I think Chris Paul has huge ties with just management between Monty and James Jones. So I don't really foresee them trading him, even if, for some reason there's injuries or he's just having a bad year. I honestly don't know if there would be much interest in him, even if it's for a superstar, like to trade a 38. And by the time that trade deadline comes around, he'll be on the way to 39 years old. I don't think many teams would want that in return for a superstar, even if it makes the salary work. I will say that the one thing about Chris Paul's contract is that I believe the first 2 years of his deal were guaranteed, and then the third year, I believe it was half guaranteed, and then the fourth year, I don't know if it was guaranteed at all, but it was only due to his age and the restrictions within the Players Association. But regardless, no, I don't think there would be a trade, and I think they would just kind of have to ride it out. I just think that Chris is going to write it out with the Suns, not just because of the loyalty, but I just don't think there will be many teams interested in that contract and his features.
I think that's definitely fair. I think the Phoenix Suns are going to be a contender again this year. It just like the health of Chris Paul is always the question when it comes to Chris Paul teams in the playoffs. If he's healthy, this offense should work. This team should work. The biggest question, the biggest ability is availability, and that's been his downfall in his career. It's not been he hasn't played well in the playoffs. It's he hasn't played in the playoffs a lot of times. And they faced a difficult team in Milwaukee and were unable to get the win, but they got there. They showed that this core was able to get there, and Cam Johnson is a much better player than he was, in that season. And Devin Booker, I think, is improved as well. Mikal Bridges is a lot better than he was, 2 years ago. So it's going to be really interesting to see this season.